Penny Sharpe, thank you for talking to me. Can you tell me why marriage equality is such an important issue for you?
For me, marriage equality is simply about equality before the law for every person in Australia. We've had huge amounts of reform for LGBTQI Australians, but yet they're still not free to marry each other. And for me, it's the final piece in what's been a very long journey towards equality.
Why do you think Australian politicians have been so slow to come on board compared to, say, other English-speaking countries?
I think you have to look a little bit about the history of LGBTI law reform in Australia. Australia has, in the last 2 decades, pretty much removed every plank of discrimination in every area of the law. And de facto law in Australia is very important, and it's the province of the states, and it's been the states that have really led the charge. So the focus in the beginning, even from the LGBTI activists in Australia, was removal of discrimination and ensuring that through de facto law, that was the fastest way towards equality, and the very practical things that come with that, like visitation rights, inheritance rights, property rights, those kind of things. As the debate's gone on, though, and we've removed all of that, now it's saying, well, it used to be a case of why marriage, and now it very much is, well, why not? And it's just simply not okay in this day and age for us to say to people in Australia that you can't marry the person you love because you're the same gender.
When did the ALP first come on board, and what's been their involvement in the debate?
Well, the ALP's been, within the Labor Party there's a group called Rainbow Labour. It actually really started in about 30 years ago, really. A group of fantastic activists got together in their lounge room and did what we call the first manifesto. I've actually got it up on my wall just there, the ALP Gay Rights Policy. And they, as you can see, it's all typed out. And it really just set an agenda for equality, and again it was pursued through that. But as Rainbow Labour became very active over the last decade or so, for us marriage was part of what we wanted to see the Labor Party do, the party that's committed to equality, that we thought should really work towards that. And I've been involved with a group of people. We'd had various attempts at changing the platform over a couple of national conferences, and essentially about 4 years ago we had a very difficult conference with really not being a lot of debate, and we just decided that it was time for us to really get our act together, and we worked very closely with one another across Australia with gay and lesbian activists, trans activists, everyone, to change the platform, which is what we did 3 years ago.
Marriage equality is often seen as a federal issue. Why do state politicians get involved, and what influence do you think they can have?
I think for us you're involved in politics because you want to change things about the world around you. And for someone, I'm an openly gay MP. Marriage equality is very important to me personally, but it's more important to me through what I see through the community that I'm connected to. And I think there's always a role to play. Myself and others in the New South Wales Parliament, we've worked very closely together over many years to reform the laws, and often, bridging the political divides and reaching out to one another and building trust and a commitment to the outcome rather than the partisan politics that goes with it. And really, a few years ago, we managed to get the final piece of law reform in New South Wales, which was adoption law reform, through. Very close, only by 2 votes. And I think through that we built a group in the Parliament who decided that we wanted to keep going with this, and marriage equality is the next step. So we had the cross-party working group, and we brought forward a bill in New South Wales. We believe that constitutionally it's possible. Ironically, because of John Howard's ban, he left a loophole open for the states. You could talk a lot about the constitutionality of it. All of us would prefer that we just legislate federally and we get it over and done with, and it includes everybody. But we've been prepared to, I suppose, make a contribution along the way of keeping the issue alive, showing that there's a depth of commitment and feeling in our community, not just within the LGBTI community, but across New South Wales, to get this law reform done.
Obviously what's happened in Ireland, the referendum there, has provided momentum here. What do you say to people who perhaps suggest that Australia should have a referendum or plebiscite?
Look, you have to look at the history of where people come to and where the countries are at in relation to these issues. My view is it's not a matter for a referendum for the Australian majority to decide on the rights of the minority. Essentially, equality is something that we should seek and be responsible for every individual in Australia. And I would say that in relation to all people, not just people of the LGBTQI community. And so I don't think it's a matter for referendum. I think it's just a matter of basic human rights, that we should ensure that no one is treated differently under the law as is currently the case.
Obviously you're a state politician, and ultimately it would be federal MPs that vote, federal politicians. What do you say to those who suggest there should be a binding or conscience vote within your own party?
Look, each party's come to these in a different way. It is my view that the Labor Party is a party of equality. I don't believe that equality is a conscience matter. I believe it should be something, as we do in the normal course of events with every other policy that we have. It's quite a different discussion, I think, than some of the other conscience vote matters that the Labor Party's chosen. But look, that's a discussion internally within the Labor Party. It'll be featured at our conference coming up in the next couple of weeks. However, having said that, I think that it's important that even within the Labor Party to know that at this point in the federal parliament, I think there's only about 10 Labor MPs who don't support it. Labor will provide the vast majority of the votes to support it, as it always has. And we look forward to the day, and I don't care whether it's through a conscience vote or anything. I just want to see marriage equality a reality in Australia, and I'll keep working to do that until we make it happen.
What do you say to those who perhaps oppose it on, say, religious, cultural or traditional grounds?
People who oppose marriage equality for that have nothing to fear from the legislation that we're putting forward. We're not saying that churches have to marry anyone that they don't wish to. And that's really important. It often gets lost in the debate. We're simply saying that marriage is a civil institution in Australia. There are a whole lot of rights and responsibilities that flow from that. And we simply think that everyone who, if you want to marry the person that you love, that you should be able to do that. Religious people are absolutely entitled to their view, and I have no problem with that at all. But it's often quite misleading, some of the debate that suggests that they're going to be forced to marry people when they don't want to. I'd also make the note there's lots of people of faith and lots of churches who've indicated that they will welcome with open arms same-sex couples when we finally change the law.
One of the arguments I sometimes hear, particularly from people who describe themselves as liberationists, is that marriage equality or marriage itself is very much a patriarchal institution, or there's a risk that marriage equality will entrench any divide between married or unmarried couples. How do you respond to them?
Well, I think that's really the fundamental difference in terms of what we're talking about. I think it's very important that we have strong de facto laws in Australia, which we do have. And essentially in New South Wales, same-sex couples are treated equally before the law in all areas of the law. And it's something that we should be very proud of in terms of the reform. That means that people who don't want to get married don't have to get married. But there are many people who want to get married. Marriage is an important social institution. It's important for many people in terms of their families. It's also important in really practical ways in relation to people who are immigrating from elsewhere. Australia is an immigration country, and we welcome same-sex couples from around the world who are married but who aren't recognised here. There are a whole range of reasons why marriage is important. But I also think it is important to say that you don't have to get married. One of the concerns, if you look at the US example, is that they don't have, in a lot of states, that there's really no de facto law reform. So it's marriage or bust. And I think in some ways that's really a problem. I think that, when Australia gets marriage equality, we'll have the perfect system, which is that your relationships will be recognised in the way that everyone else's are. Choose to get married or not, you're treated the same either way.
A couple more questions. Do you think marriage equality here is inevitable, and what's the timeline?
I absolutely think it's inevitable. The community is so far ahead of the politicians on this issue. Frankly, it's now just embarrassing that Australia's so far behind. We've always been a progressive nation that's led the world in many areas of human rights. I do think it's inevitable. I'm optimistic. The momentum that came out of Ireland, I think, was really important here in the debate, and the sounds coming out of Canberra from the coalition and the conservative side of politics are good. Having said that, we've been waiting for them to get their act together for quite a long time, and while I know, and I work really closely with conservative MPs who support equality, and all power to them, I think that hopefully we'll get it this year. In reality, though, I think it really will be the next Labor government that comes to power. I think it will happen under there. The reason for that is pretty straightforward, actually. One is more Labor MPs support marriage equality overwhelmingly on a conscience vote scenario. usually between sort of, depending on the issue, Labor provides usually between sort of 65 to 90% of the vote, and you mop up with those moderate Conservatives, plus the sort of progressive crossbenchers that exist. I think that the reality is that the next Labor Prime Minister will oversee a change to marriage equality. Having said that, I'm very optimistic about the end of this year. I think that it's the best chance we've had so far, and myself and anyone who's committed to marriage equality, we're working as hard as we can to get those numbers for hopefully a vote later this year.
And finally, what can people who support marriage equality do to get involved in the campaign?
I think that the best thing they can do is to speak to their families and to speak to, get in contact with their local MP. The power of telling your story about why this is important to you and your family is incredibly powerful. And as we've seen MPs change their minds over time, and they all are doing that, I believe that most MPs want to be on the right side of history, and history will judge us poorly for the discrimination that the LGBTI community have suffered. I think that most MPs who, when they're thinking about this, want to know that. But I think the tangible conversation that says, this is important to me and my family, the dads that go and say, I want to marry I have a daughter and a son, one of them can get married, the other one cannot. They are very powerful stories, and I think that that's one of the things that you can do. And don't talk to the ones that already support it. They don't need another person through their door. MPs are very busy. But those ones who, have been a bit quiet or you think don't support it, particularly in the rural and regional areas, I think it's important for them to know that, this issue touches people in all communities, in all classes, in all regions, and it's something that's really profoundly important to people in this country. And until it's actually resolved, there's a wound there within our community about unfair and unequal treatment that I think will heal greatly once we actually deliver marriage equality.
Penny Sharpe, thank you very much.
Thank you.